Just 6 game weeks left. Let's keep the momentum going as we make the final push. Welcome back to the Draft FC podcast, the podcast, website and YouTube channel dedicated to all things official Draft FPL. My name is Mitch and I'm your host for another Game Week preview, going over waiver options, hidden gems and general Premier League chat ahead of Game Week 33. Now, the doubles last week really showed the contrast in fortunes you can have in the waivers. You may have been quite pleased with Mateta, for example, just the 2 points. Perhaps Daniel Munoz, -1 point from 180 minutes. Contrast that if you picked up Harvey Barnes, who likely won every matchup he was involved in single-handedly in head-to-head leagues, with 27 points in Game Week 32. I did say a couple of weeks ago how bad the remaining Crystal Palace fixtures were on paper, but I didn't expect them to lose 10-2 on aggregate across the 2 games in the last game week. It's certainly off-putting when evaluating them again this week, because we obviously have more doublers to consider, but the main thing to weigh is how your team will look in Game Week 34. A team of doublers this week means a team of blanks next week, so going with too many will certainly have consequences, and this is really where the game is won and lost. So it makes for an interesting planning week for those, especially in head-to-head leagues. You do have to have a big eye on who your matchup is in Game Week 34, and if it's a big one, then you can't overexpose yourself in Game Week 33. As always, if you enjoy this content, give us a thumbs up if you're watching on YouTube. Click the subscribe button so you don't miss out on future episodes as they drop. And if you're listening to the audio, then follow on whichever podcast platform that you are listening on. I'm recording this episode on Thursday, the 17th of April, so any team news, injury developments, or press conference info are up to date as of now, and of course, subject to change. We've still got a couple of European games to go tonight, which could throw some spanners in the works. Quite a tight turnaround. We do have a little bit of time, as I'll say in a second, before the waivers tomorrow, but let's get straight into it. So a reminder right at the top, the waiver deadline will be at the slightly later time of 1:30 in the afternoon, Friday the 18th of April, ahead of the main game week deadline. 24 hours later on Saturday lunchtime. So no early Saturday kickoff, which means the waiver deadline is pushed back by a couple of hours. So if you do forget tomorrow, then you'll be forgiven. Not going to do Waiver Watch this week because, as you might imagine, the main players coming in and out last week, or the main players coming in, were a lot of Newcastle players. So there's not really much of an insight there. So we'll skip over that this week. In terms of key injuries and suspensions, thankfully not a huge number to cover. The main one, which we'll cover the ramifications of in just a minute, is Ederson for Manchester City, who's got a muscular injury, and we're not really sure quite how bad that is yet, with some reports suggesting it could be the end of his season, but no firm news there. Very similar to Xerxes, who's also got a hamstring injury, and again, some reports on the worst end of things reporting his season could be over. But let's get into the main picks, and as I said, with when one door closes, another door opens, so if Ederson is injured, it does open the door for Ortega, and not a bad 1 week punt. And I think, particularly given how late in the season it is, you can look at goalkeepers with a view to 1 week punt. So if I'm looking at my own goalkeepers in my main league, one of them I've got at the moment is Verbruggen. Now, Brighton have not been keeping many clean sheets at all recently. Their fixtures aren't particularly great coming up. So I'm happily looking to drop him for Ortega, even if that means that I've only got Ortega just for this week. I wouldn't mind at all. With Villa at home, Everton away, a very good chance for at least one clean sheet between those two. And City generally looking a lot more defensively sound and structurally sound. Ownership is still reasonably high. He's available in about 50% of 10-team leagues. He is available in mine. As I said, he is penciled in for a waiver claim tomorrow in my own league. Into defenders, and a player who's very much been on here for a few weeks now is Kiwior for Arsenal, approaching 50% ownership with their double Crystal Palace at home and Ipswich away. Very nice and a definite pickup if he's available. Liverpool are one of the teams I like the look of if you're interested in, or if you're not interested in double game week as this week. They go away to Leicester, and he's your surest and easiest way into a potential Liverpool clean sheet. Ownership again pushing 50%, but he's available in most 10-team leagues. West Ham are the other ones that we're going to have a big eye on this weekend with their home game against Southampton. Obviously, West Ham have not had a good season, and I'm saying that even as a Spurs fan. They've managed to slot themselves lower than us in the Premier League table, but a home game to Southampton is too difficult to ignore. Kilman is right up there in the ownership, approaching 50%, which is quite high, really. And there are lots of other West Ham defenders with far bigger availability. So if for whatever reason Kilman was taken, or if your head-to-head matchup already has maybe Kilman or one of the West Ham keepers, for example, then there should be plenty of accessible options in the waivers to cover that off if you're interested in a West Ham defender yourself. And then the final one on the list is Matty Cash for Aston Villa. His ownership is just 20%. A real tricky double for Villa this week, and a huge week as they look to get back into the Champions League next season. City and Newcastle, both rivals for those remaining Champions League spots, and Villa do need to try and avoid defeats here. It may force them to play full strength, more or less, in both of those games. So I'm actually slightly less concerned about rotation for Villa, even though we normally would expect to see quite a lot, especially following quite a big, tiring European game. Into midfield, and the first one is Joe Linton, again as a bit of a placeholder. The Newcastle guys served us very well last game week. Newcastle have Ipswich at home next week. So even though on paper they have a single game away at Villa, it's not ideal. Just have a look at your squad, and if you can afford to park one or two of these guys on the bench this week, then you may be glad to have them back again in Game 34. Next is Yuri Tielemans, ownership 44% in 10-team leagues. I think we may have missed the returns with 2 in the last 2 for him, and we don't know how much the last couple of weeks will have taken out of, as I said, the Villa squad in general, both physically and mentally. But one thing we can usually rely on is that Tielemans will start. So one of those, it's a double game week. Even if he plays and doesn't do anything at all, you're looking at 3 or 4 points, which is not the end of the world. If you want to go a little bit more exciting than that, though, maybe consider the likes of Mohamed Kudus. Ownership just over the halfway mark in 10-team leagues. One of the most disappointing FPL assets this season, has to be said, but with a home game against Southampton to pad out his stats before the season's over, why not have a look at him this weekend? His underlying stats remain relatively underwhelming, it has to be said. So this is a pure vibes pick, knowing what he is capable of on his day. Must be said, and I'll whisper this slightly, but the player that isn't on the list, and the far less sexy pick here, is Thomas Souček, who Draft FC OGs know I'm a big fan of. Non-penalty expecting goal involvements of 0.5, and that's per 90 over the last month or two, which is actually higher than teammate Jared Bowen. A not so glamorous pick. I wouldn't be surprised, though, to see him get on the score sheet if he starts that game. Another little bit more exciting pick, if you're not bothered by the likes of Tielemans, is Garnacho for Man United. Ownership is sitting around 60% at the moment, so attainable for a fair few leagues out there, and finally showing some form late on in the season, and a very safe spot in the United starting 11. They've got some decent fixtures to finish off the season, starting with Wolves at home this game week. Definitely one for your list if you're not bothered by any of the available doublers. And definitely one if you're looking for a bit of a differential pickup when everyone else is going to be scrambling for those players with a double. Could be someone that can really set you right till the end now and get you some very important points. And then the final midfielder from the main section is Declan Rice for Arsenal. Now, ownership is high, just under the 3/4 mark, but it means he will be there for a few of you. Ownership in top 100 leagues actually dropped slightly this week, especially for those of you in those leagues. He will be there potentially. So fairly rotation proof, good value for attacking returns. His non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 this season are a career best 0.41 and should push him closer to last season's tally of 7 goals and 8 assists, which, that came from non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 of just 0.25. So he's outperforming that. Currently sits 2 goals and 8 assists after a slow start. And again, somebody who has pretty good value now over the stretch. But do bear in mind, like all of the doublers, you'll get 2 games this week, but he will blank next week. And then finally, Fulkrug for West Ham. You know, the forwards at this stage of the season, it really is pretty dead conversation. I'd expect a few more minutes this week after 3 sub-appearances. West Ham desperately need a reliable striker, and this could be a great game to get him back in the 11 and build confidence against the weakest team in the league. Do comment below any players that I haven't mentioned that you're interested in this week, and I'll be sure to reply to them and give you my thoughts. But let's forward on to the hidden gems. These are all players with generally less than 10% ownership in average size leagues. Starting with the defenders, and a player right at the top is Alex Moreno, who has got a fairly good run in the starting 11 now with Ola Aina's injury. A game against Spurs, it is away, but a game against Spurs away is a pretty good fixture on paper, and the contrasting fortunes of these teams in the league means that Forest are firm favourites. Not only that, Moreno will be lining up at left back. I expect him to be marauding up and down there, and Spurs have looked extremely vulnerable regardless of who the personnel are on the right side of their defence all season long. And if I had to throw a dart at the Nottingham Forest team to try and land on an attacking return, I would certainly be aiming for their left-hand side. So do keep an eye on that. Next, we've got a couple of those West Ham defenders for a very cheap way in if you need to. Tadaibo, his ownership just 2% and Scarl's just 1%. And he's actually in most hidden gem pick territory with ownership less than 10% in 16-team leagues. So a good option pretty much all around for those of you listening. But even though it is Southampton at home, West Ham by no means guaranteed to get a clean sheet there. Into midfield, Gundogan for Manchester City. Ownership just 9% in 10-team leagues. Games against Everton and Villa in the double game week. His non-penalty expecting goal involvements per 90 in the last couple of months stands at 0.67, which is very good. And he's actually underperformed the stats in that time. City do seem to be finding a better working unit without Savio and Doku. That being said, I wouldn't be totally surprised if the wingers did start one of the two games, but Gundogan looks as safe as any of the City mids to play in both games, and I think is a very good punt for this game week. Then to Villa, a couple of options, McGinn and Ramsey, very similar ownership. Aside from Tielemans, the other near ever-present player in that Villa midfield is John McGinn. The returns haven't really been there this season. Tielemans would be my much preferred option out of the guys that you might find in the waivers if you've got the choice of them, but not a bad way to cover off if your matchup already has one or two of the Villa players. Ramsey, very similar to McGinn. The attacking returns have not been there, but whether he starts on the pitch or on the bench, he seems to always get minutes, so is not going to totally let you down with a 0 or 1 pointer for the double. Predicted lineups have been updated today, and you can find them in the usual spot. And even for those who are not members, the link will be in the description below to check them out. Or just Google Premier League predicted lineups, and our site will come up somewhere near the top. So we'll leave things there for this week. A reminder again, the waiver deadline is at 1:30 in the afternoon tomorrow, Friday the 18th of April. So a couple of hours after the conventional waiver deadline time. So no excuses to forget this. Just 6 game weeks left, so every game week counts now, particularly if you're in classic scoring leagues. You cannot afford to take your eye off the ball. And for those head-to-head leagues, do make sure you have a big eye on game week 34, because if you're in need of lots of 3 points in these remaining game weeks, could end up writing off a good chance at a win next week if you just go a bit overboard on your Villa and your Palace players, which may in the end not actually do any better than some of the single game week players. That is going to be a huge amount of discussion this week. I'm sure lots of you will be looking at waiver options, trying to weigh up a pretty below average doubler versus a maybe slightly above average single game week player. Very difficult to give one size fits all advice in that front, but if you do have any specific player head-to-heads that you're struggling with, then do comment them below or reach out through the other means and I will get back to you. Again, give us a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button and the follow button wherever you're listening or watching so you don't miss out on any future episodes and helps us get out there to more eyes and ears. But I'll leave things there. Best of luck for your head-to-head matchups and classic scoring leagues this week. I hope you get all the points you want. I hope you get the players you need from the waivers. And until next time, stay sure.